Well, good morning. Happy 4th of July weekend. Welcome to the Science of Mind class. I am Dr. Petra, and I am thrilled to be with you guys this morning. So just happy 4th and happy Independence Day and happy Independence Weekend. Karen and I had the opportunity over the last 2 nights to watch Hamilton. And oh man, is it fabulous. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it's streaming right now. And so I don't know how much beyond the weekend it's going to be streaming. So I would highly recommend it. It is really extraordinary to see the story unfold and then to ask yourself what parallels there are in today's current experience that we're having right now. So I hope you're safe this weekend and taking good care of yourself and protecting yourself when you're out, both not only with masks and social and physical distancing, but also with consciousness, right? And that's what we're talking about, spiritual mind treatment and spiritual mind healing, and the use of consciousness to express ourselves and to deal with the conditions of our lives. So we're finishing up this section on spiritual mind healing, and I just want to, we've been talking about demonstration, which means the actual manifestation of the changed condition or the healed condition that we want. And I want to read this last paragraph on page 176. There is nothing in the world more specific than a scientific treatment. Nothing in the world more specific than a scientific treatment, right? Because spiritual mind treatment is we call it the science of mind because there is science behind how we do this affirmative work, and it is using laws and principles of the universe that can be replicated and proven in our own lives. And for specific demonstrations, for specific outcomes. We should be very clear that it is completely appropriate, and this is the whole point of doing our spiritual mind treatments, is to actually heal and change conditions or grow something new. But there is nothing that should be so released from outline as a scientific treatment. And what does that mean? That means our job is not the how. Our job is the what. And it's specifically, the best example is in healing, right? Any good doctor will tell you they only provide a healing environment. The body itself knows how to heal itself. So you have surgery, the wound is stitched back up again. The doctor does not actually cause that wound to regrow, creates a healing environment, make sure there's no infection, stitches it back up again. But it is the intelligence and wisdom of the body itself that actually heals and until that wound is nothing more than a faint little scar that's left. That is the intelligence of the laws and principles that are operating in the physical universe in our physical bodies. So we don't outline the how that will happen. We don't say, oh, and then the blood vessels will come together, and then the nerves will, and this molecule will touch that molecule, and these cells will hook onto that cell, and then eventually the skin will close up. Right? That would be saying how this healing is going to take place. No, we say the wound is healed. And this is true at every level. Our job in our spiritual mind healing is to speak the word for the end result, the what, very specifically what we want to have healed, changed, or grown, the outcome, the end result. And we can be as specific as we want to be, but we don't outline how we get from here to there. That is the job of the universal principle, the infinite intelligence of the body of life, which is, of course, the physical universe, the space-time continuum. There is no secret in this business of demonstration. The only secret is the persistent ability to use the law and the determination to continue to use it until we prove it. The persistent ability to use the law, to use the universal principle, the law of cause and effect, the natural laws and the spiritual laws that are operating in the fabric of the space-time continuum itself, to use these laws consciously and deliberately and persistently, to continue to use it until we prove it. And how do we prove that we're using the laws? We have a demonstration. We have an actual manifestation that we can point to, that we can document, that we can say it's different than it was before, and it's in alignment with the outpicturing that I had in my mind. So that concludes our conversation about demonstrations. And not to be afraid to be very specific. I know sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to be specific because I don't want to limit the universe. How we generally limit the universe is by demanding to know how something is going to come about. That is more often than not how we limit the universal principles. But we are completely free to say what we desire. And that can be as specific or as general as we want. The challenge with general is that if we don't give the universal principles new direction, it's simply going to continue to create out of the consciousness that we have in the back of our minds, right? The pattern of thinking, the pattern of expectation that we have of life, the patterns that have been laid down since the day we were born. That's what the universe is going to use to create our life, unless we give it a new pattern or a new mold to fill. So we're going to talk about this. This is the beginning of the next section. And this, I think, is really important because it really answers the question, well, why do bad things happen to good people? And why did I get sick? I didn't say in my mind, oh, I'm going to get sick, or I think I'll lose my job now. I think I'll have a difficult and challenging life. So this really begins to give us a sense of where our starting point is. So this is the summary of part 2, the summary of spiritual mind healing. And interestingly enough, it's the completion of this first whole division of the book, the Science of Mind book, which is on ideation, which is basically on the theory that everything rests on. Starting here shortly in part 3, the second division is on practice. It's really focusing on how you put it into practice in different situations and circumstances. But our specific use of the universal laws and principles in an identifiable manner is predicated upon the idea that we know what we're doing, which means we actually have to understand the theory. All right, so before we move on, it looks like we have a comment or a question. So I'm going to turn over here to Ryan Brown, and he is going to share the thoughts that are coming in.
Thank you, Petra. I appreciate that. And so we had a comment come in, and I'm just going to read it to you aloud. It said, Petra, I recently asked an individual to tell me what demonstrations they had from spiritual mind treatment. Their response was, well, didn't specifically do a spiritual mind treatment, but something that I had been wanting to have manifest actually did manifest. Now the question is, did this happen as a result of the person's consciousness or just happenstance or subconscious spiritual mind treatment without the 5 stages?
That is a great question, right? So you do not need to do a spiritual mind treatment to demonstrate. We're demonstrating all the time. We are constantly demonstrating an outpicturing of what we believe to be true and the mental images and pictures and embodiment that we have in our subjective subconscious mind. So ultimately, it is always a result of consciousness. It is the development of a consciousness around something that then automatically the universal principles produce in our lives. The only point of spiritual mind treatment is to deliberately develop a consciousness. That's what spiritual mind treatment does. There's nothing magic about spiritual mind treatment. A spiritual mind treatment isn't required to make a demonstration, but sometimes we need a little bit of deliberate intentionality to create a consciousness or to change a consciousness. And a spiritual mind treatment allows us to very consciously and deliberately intend to change our consciousness about something. And so, thank God we can demonstrate all kinds of things without ever doing a spiritual mind treatment, or we would never have moved forward in our life up until learning spiritual mind treatment, right? The sole purpose of spiritual mind treatment is to give a tool to use when we want to actually deliberately demonstrate something, and we don't want to just wait for a consciousness to grow spontaneously. So, for instance, it would be really no different than I want to grow wheat in my field, and rather than simply waiting for wheat seeds to be blown in by the wind and to find a way to grow and have it all work out, I literally cultivate the field, plant the seeds, and voila, I have a wheat field. I could certainly wait for all my neighbors' wheat fields to populate my field, but I can also deliberately plant. So spiritual mind treatment does nothing more than deliberately plant consciousness, deliberately plant a new idea and a new mentality into our consciousness, and we do it to the point where that consciousness is created. And we can create consciousness over time without doing a spiritual mind treatment, of course. And that's then what is constantly demonstrating. And that's why so often people say, well, I was really positive about it, but it didn't happen. Well, basically what they were indulging in was wishful thinking, or fantasizing, or magical thinking. Well, if I just, don't look at what's wrong, it'll somehow magically take care of itself. No, it doesn't magically take care of itself. There are universal principles and laws that we're using, and we're either using them unconsciously, right, which is what happens when we demonstrate just out of the consciousness that we're growing, or we use it consciously and deliberately. And spiritual mind treatment isn't even the only way that we use it consciously and deliberately, right? We use it every time we do an affirmation, every time we do a visualization, every time we do a meditation, every time we set an intention. Spiritual mind treatment takes all of that and captures it into a very coherent framework and structure, which, if done properly, will accelerate the process of creating a consciousness which then must demonstrate, right? That's what a spiritual mind treatment is. All right, so I want to start with this summary here of part 2 on page 177. The possibility of spiritual mind healing, changing environment, controlling conditions, etc., through the power of right thinking rests entirely upon the theory that we are surrounded by a universal mind which reacts to our thought, and always according to law, to principle, always in an identifiable manner. Now, if the Science of Mind textbook would have been written today, the word mind probably would have been the word consciousness. In the 1930s and the 1920s and 30s, when this book was written, consciousness was not as well used of a word, not as ubiquitous of an understanding. And so at the time, mind was the word that was used, really based on the Greek word psyche, our mentality. And it meant anyway. Okay, let's not get on a big aside. Doesn't matter. Okay, so surrounded by a universal mind, a consciousness. And how do we know that it's a mind? This consciousness is because it evidences intelligence. And that intelligence shows up as these lawful ways in which life unfolds, right? A cat doesn't have puppies. A cat has kittens. A tomato seed doesn't grow corn. It grows a tomato plant. These are rigorous laws that we can understand and use. So the possibility of this work, this spiritual work that we do, rests entirely upon a theory that we understand what we're doing. Otherwise, quite frankly, we're just indulging in magical thinking or in wishful thinking. And sure, if we think something long enough and really try to set our intention around it, absolutely we can demonstrate. No question about it. But again, a spiritual mind treatment accelerates that, trains our thinking to really build upon the spiritual truth that we know, and then create an avenue in our consciousness in which we ourselves are changed. Our consciousness is changed. And then, of course, the law, we've just planted a seed, and the law must now manifest it. The universal principle of the law of cause and effect must now manifest it. But here's the clincher, right? Here's where we want to talk. This is what we want to talk about a little bit today. The spiritual human is perfect, but our individual use of life and law enables us to cover a perfect idea with an apparently imperfect cloak. Right? So we are made in the image and likeness of the divine, perfect in every way. There's a perfect pattern for being a human being, being a spiritual being, having a human experience, and yet our lives don't necessarily always look perfect, do they? Not by any means. And our culture and our society doesn't look perfect, and bad things happen to good people. So we can cover the perfect idea of life and manifestation with an apparently imperfect cloak. So what's the explanation for this, and how do we get out of it? Sickness is not a spiritual reality. Sickness is not a spiritual reality. It is an experience, an effect, not a cause. The body, devoid of its own mentality, could neither know or experience sensation. It is entirely an effect. The body of a human being is made from the same undifferentiated spiritual substance from which all creation is formed. Right? And we know this. We know this from the physicists and astrophysicists who have said we're made out of stardust, basically saying we are made out of the very same things that all of creation is made out of. All of creation made out of the same elements, made out of the same molecules, all of it operating in the same way. So we are made out of the same stuff. Our physical bodies are made out of the same stuff as the universe, the physical universe itself. And the physical universe is a creation, right? Every spiritual tradition agrees that the physical universe is a creation, that it isn't, it is the result of a movement of life, an impulse of life for creation to come into being. So here we go on to the next little paragraph. Human beings come into object. Oh, okay, I see a hand before we move on.
Yeah, thanks, Petra. I just had a question, and it kind of relates in and around what we're talking about right now. Mm-hmm. And this comes from Madeline. She says, aren't we universal mind, not just surrounded by it? That seems like separation, I and me.
So we're always, Madeline, is a great question. We are always going to run up into this problem. So the minute that we start talking about the human experience, the physical creation, universal mind, we are going to apparently separate things. Otherwise, I would simply sit up here and say, well, one, and one shows up as one, and oneness then creates oneness, and one, and one. And do you see our language, for us to really understand the various aspects of this oneness, we actually call the different aspects different things. And so we have to hold all of that lightly and try to see that what we're doing is we are trying to grasp different functionalities of the one so we can see how the whole works. Otherwise, we can't talk about it. So the best example that I have of this, and to help us maybe hold it lightly, is that I am a single organism. I am a whole entity of myself, yes? But I can talk about my physical body separate from my emotional experience, separate from what my mind thinks, separate from my spiritual awareness of oneness. And I do that so that I can talk about the fact that I've stubbed my toe and it hurts. And now I'm mad because the thing I stubbed my toe on was in the wrong place. And my mind can imagine, well, really, it should have been moved. Do you see? I'm not actually separating who I am in my experience, but I would never know that I should move this thing that I stubbed my toe on if I can't talk about the different aspects of them and how they relate. Otherwise, I'm stuck with one and one and one and one. Do you see? So let's hold the sense of separation. So the reason it's a sense of separation is because when we talk about things to get a hold of them, we forget that it's only a way of talking about various aspects of a whole. And this is where that sense of separation creeps in, is when we begin to believe that all of these things are somehow detached from each other. They're not detached from each other. They're different aspects of an infinite whole. And so the infinite whole, right? Yes, there's a universal mind. That universal mind is part of the mind that we use as well. And that universal mind shows up as universal creation, which is the effect of the cause that the mind is holding. It's all part of the one, but the effect is actually effect. It's not a cause. Right? And so we have to be able to decide which aspect of this process are we talking about. So it's a great question, and we're constantly running up against, let's remember that anytime we are talking about a piece of or a part of the whole, we're only trying to identify something that we're getting our hands around, not actually something that is not part of the one. All right, Ryan.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention what Bobby had said in here from a quote from Emerson. And it says, individuality allows spirit to be self-aware.
Yes, absolutely. Right? And that's a part of that whole process of individuating. So, good. So we're going to go on to this section here. Man comes into objectivity. Human beings come into objectivity, which is, to Bobby's point, self-awareness, right? That's what objectivity means in terms of metaphysics, not in terms of English, not in terms of psychoanalysis, not in terms of subject-object, the way that you might ever have known it ever before, right? So when metaphysics and science of mind uses the word objectivity, they mean that it is the ability to be self-aware. Human beings come into objectivity with the tendency of the race, and by that race means humanity, with the tendency of humanity already subjectified within us through race suggestion. The race experiences sickness and limitation, and this suggestion is more or less operative through all people. It works through the subjective race thought and operates through the individual. Man need not consciously think negation in order to produce a physical disturbance. Okay, so what does this all mean? So what this all means is we are the product of evolution. The intelligence and the impulse of life itself has been over 13.5 billion years, at least in this universe that we know of, and on this planet that we know of. been striving towards self-awareness, exactly as Bobby said, that the universal oneness without a sense of separation can't experience itself, can't see what it itself is doing, and can't express in all these diverse and unique forms. Human beings are by no means the only place where self-awareness is happening, probably not even on this planet, but certainly not in the universe and in the galaxies. But we're pretty self-absorbed. It's the one we're most interested in, isn't it? Because it's our experience. So we are the product of biological evolution that has created an organism, that has created organs through which intelligence can move and consciousness can experience itself. Right? So during that whole process of evolution, the whole system first was physically, the whole point was survival mode, physical survival, right? We created the reptilian brain, and then we talk about this, and then the limbic brain started to build belonging and relationships and the emotional body and the experience, and ultimately the cerebral cortex, which actually allowed us to do what we're doing today, which is categorize and individuate and identify and talk about things as if they were separate, so that we could see things as individual aspects of a whole. So over the course of millennia, this whole process has created a mentality. Rupert Sheldrake calls it a morphogenetic field. It's a field of consciousness within which the species called human beings has evolved, which begins to lay down patterns of engaging with life, threat, fight or flight, tribe, creating belonging. And then things like life is challenging, life is hard. Think about it, up until antibiotics, if somebody scratched themselves and it got infected, they could possibly die from that because people didn't know and how to heal that infection always, right? And so the experience of humanity as it has evolved, has laid down what is called race suggestion. And the idea that those things are passed along. Why? Because each generation sees how the previous generation has handled things. And not only is it to a certain extent in our cellular memory of our brains, it's then also reinforced by the behavior that we see, right? And so the classic thing, right? Abusers people who are abused can often turn into abusers. Why? Because that's what they saw. That's the pattern that got laid down in their childhood as to how people behave. Now extrapolate that out, centuries, millennia of this ongoing development of the race, the species, human being, Homo sapien, right? And so Homo sapien has a shared consciousness about what it means to be a human being and the kinds of things that human beings are confronted with. In the awakening of spiritual awareness, in the awakening of self-awareness, and the beginning to recognize the natural laws, which begin to open up the scientific understanding of the spiritual laws, humanity is now becoming aware of the opportunity to engage in creating these patterns, which up until now have been simply inherited, passed along over and over and over again, over the generations, over the centuries, over the millennium. And it is more or less operative through all people. Life is hard. You got to work hard. People die. People things, you never know what's going to happen around the corner. You never know when the flood's going to come. And all of those, right? Those are very real conclusions. This is what is true, that human beings have shared as survival, and then the building of civilizations was the first task. And now we're to the point where we are becoming so aware in the last 5,000 years, we are beginning to become aware of the fact that we are not just victims of all of this, that we can actually affect it. And of course, that's the originating principle behind all religion. I want to affect my experience of reality. Can I appease the gods? Can I appease the gods so that the river doesn't flood? Can I appease the gods so my child grows well? Can I work with the gods so that I am so aligned with life that I can hunt and bring back food for my family, right? And in every case, the exact same spiritual laws were being used. They were just couched in different terms because we had not yet developed the same scientific understanding that we have today. So over the last 5,000 years, certainly in the Western tradition, probably longer in the Eastern tradition, we've been building this awareness, which is fundamental to the science of mind. Ernest Holmes asked the question, why are some prayers answered and not others? And the science of mind was birthed, and spiritual mind treatment was birthed out of the answer to that question. Well, because in some prayers, there is such a deep intention created, such a deep belief, such a deep conviction that the universe or God is supporting the answer to this, that then the demonstration happens. And the belief that the shaman who's dancing and praying over me is actually healing me goes a long way to creating a consciousness of healing, right? And so there's a self-reinforcing process that begins to lay down new patterns. And all spiritual mind treatment is a form, not even necessarily the best form, not even necessarily the only form, certainly the best one that I know of. It's a form to develop a new consciousness so that we are not subject to inherited consciousness, race consciousness, human consciousness, so that Thomas Troward calls it, we raise ourselves above the law of averages. We raise ourselves out of the belief that, well, your mother had this, so you're going to have it. Your father had this, so you're going to have it. Your parents had this, so this is what's going to happen to you, right? We're raising ourselves out of the what in the science of mind is called race suggestion, which is as I said, Rupert Sheldrake calls it the morphogenetic field, the field of consciousness which humanity shares as a whole. And we are incrementally and continually shifting that shared consciousness, and then as individuals, because we are individuated self-awarenesses, we're able to do the same. We're able to raise ourselves out of it and to say, no, that doesn't have to be true at all. I'm setting a new cause in motion. And ultimately, all spiritual work that's around healing a condition, changing an environment, or growing something new is about creating a new cause, planting a new seed, putting a new cause in motion. And that's why we talk about the scientific universal principles, the law of cause and effect. If a cause is set in motion, the effect is assured, barring unforeseen circumstances, right? So you don't keep digging up the seed. You keep watering it and and fertilizing it with belief and with expectation. That seed is going to grow. That's what seeds do. Acorns turn into oak trees. Tomato seeds turn into tomato plants. That is inherent within their nature, right? Which is why we started this today. We can be as specific about the end result that we want. It's the universal principle's job to grow the seed into that outcome, into that plant, into that demonstration. And so why bad things happen to us is because not because we believe them, it's because we don't believe something different. Do you see what I'm saying? So Kathy Ann Lewis, she says this thing that I think is really great. We either create, promote, or allow, right? I create something by setting a deliberate intention, and I can set that intention with good. I'm going to create a fabulous life. Or I can set that intention with ill. I'm going to be so afraid and so worried that I'm going to lose my job that I actually create that outcome. Right? So I create it by thinking about it, setting intentions around it, giving it a lot of emotional energy and impact. Spiritual mind treatment teaches us how to do that purposefully and consciously. I can promote it by constantly talking about it without necessarily setting an intention, but kind of talking about it, either talking like that one question that Ryan brought forward, somebody who demonstrated without doing a spiritual mind treatment, right? Promoting it by continually talking about how my life is unfolding good and I'm living in a prosperous universe, or I'm healthy, or I'm promoting it. I can just as easily promote it. So I'm worried about things and God, just never really quite works out, and nothing ever changes, right? I'm just promoting old ideas. Or allowing. What does allowing? I'm on automatic pilot. I'm unconscious of the fact that Ray's suggestion that the beliefs in the field of human consciousness are in fact what's running me. So I'm simply allowing them to run. I'm simply on automatic. This is what we mean by being unconscious, by being asleep. And so now my life is being created from all of those unconscious patterns that have been laid down in my childhood, by my family, by my larger family, by my tribe, by my culture, by my religion, by my nation, by humanity itself. Right? And so I'm allowing it because I'm not choosing anything different. That's what that means. I'm basically on automatic pilot. I'm absolutely unconscious of the fact that the universal laws, the universal law of cause and effect, is taking what's in my subconscious mind and out picturing it. And so until we're ready to take a hold of that and say, no, that is not true for me. I do not have to simply experience what humanity has always experienced up until this point, because I know I'm actually a spiritual being, and I can use these laws now to set new causes in motion. All right, we'll stop right there because I see that Ryan has a comment from one of you.
I do. So what I'm going to do is ask Dennis. Dennis, do you want to go ahead and just unmute yourself?
Hi, Dennis.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, thank you for yesterday. That was wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, it was really, we had a fun 4th of July hour gathering on Zoom. I hope you were there. I know Dennis was able to be there. We had Eddie Watkins.
It just made me realize how much I missed everybody.
I know.
It really
so
does.
Thank you, Dennis. It was so great to see everybody's faces, wasn't it?
Yeah. But with this, I'll tell you, it's amazing what I learned in this class, the realizations I have. As you were explaining all this, create, promote, allow, it just really hit home for really at the office. I didn't realize there was categories for this, but I get what I do is I personally create.
Yes.
To others, I promote.
Yes.
And I absolutely refuse to allow.
Yes. Good. That's exactly right. That's when you say in your own mind, no. You don't have to say it always out loud, but no, that's not my spiritual truth, right? You're not allowing it. Good for you. But
I got a new line from you. Yeah, no. It's like, because there's certain things I go like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I go, well, I always say because I said so.
Uh-huh.
In other words, okay, well, then they take it wrong. It's like, well, you're a little uppity here. I was like, no. It's just the way. But no, the new one. Yeah. An acorn always turns into an oak tree.
That's right. Beautiful.
So yeah, that was it. I just had to make that comment. But that's what I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But yes, I personally create, to others I promote, and I absolutely refuse to allow.
Good for you. That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Dennis. And of course, it's exactly what we want to do in our own consciousness. We want to create the world we want to see, the life we want to see. We want to promote that by narrating a new vision into being, whether it's a vision for our own lives, whether it's a vision for our nation, or a vision for our planet. We want to promote a new cause, a new truth. And we want to make sure that we're not allowing unconscious bias, unconscious beliefs, well, this is just the way it is, right? That's an unconscious race. That is a belief that is lodged in humanity, in the ubiquitous subjective consciousness of humanity. And every time that we don't allow, do you see, we're not only clearing it out of our own consciousness, we're clearing it out of consciousness altogether, right? So let's go back to Madeline's question. Aren't we all universal mind? Yes. Yes, yes, and yes. And the mind that we're using is that universal mind. And so when we are clearing out our own subconscious, our own subjective mentality, when we are clearing those beliefs out, we are literally clearing them out of race consciousness, of humanity, of the tendencies for humanity to see things, right? This is why so often you hear the idea of a shift in consciousness, right? Not only a shift in consciousness for ourselves, but a shift in consciousness in the whole, in humanity as a whole. And remember, we read this not too long ago. Ernest Holmes says we can demonstrate in spite of ourselves. We can demonstrate in spite of our fear and our doubt and our uncertainty, right? Because we just need that cause to be at 51%. And when it starts reaching 60 and 70%, man, it's tipping the scales. It's tipping the scales to that new outcome. And as we do that in our own lives, we see how we're contributing to that happening in our society, in our culture, on the planet, right? That's what it means to shift consciousness. And we've seen it over and over and over again in the last, we've seen it as long as humanity has been evolving, right? There's just a thousand examples from in 1066, the Magna Carta, to the Protestant Reformation, to women's suffrage, to the LGBT marriage equality, now to what's going on to one more awakening of the racial hate-based violence in the United States, right? And we're seeing each time that people are setting new causes in motion. They're no longer allowing, they're no longer promoting, they're creating something new. And eventually, not only does our own unconscious bias get cleared out, but in the process, we are at the same time, because it's just one mind, we're at the same time shifting consciousness for the whole. And eventually, that consciousness shifts, right? And we see the scale tipped, right? And a new pattern is laid down. A new pattern is laid down. And of course, we know that sometimes there's old vestiges of the old pattern, just like there are in our own minds, and we have to keep clearing it out and weeding it out, and and can be a little process until a fully new vested consciousness is utterly embraced. Ryan.
Thanks, Petra. So I'm going to ask Shauna, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, Shauna?
Good morning, Dr. Petra.
Good morning, Shauna. So good to hear your voice.
So I need counsel.
Okay.
So I am really holding to my belief that people are good and the consciousness of the world is raising. And we are in the midst of massive change moving toward that consciousness, right? And last night I had a long conversation with a really dear friend And he grew up in Alabama, but he's been in Dallas a long time, and I've known him for 23 years. And we were having this conversation, and I was holding hard to my belief that people are going to change things in this next election, and that there's a increase in consciousness, and people are standing up, and people are being aware. But he was in so much pain because, he went back to first grade and talked about the day that JF Kennedy died, and being a first grader and listening to his teachers say they killed our president. And then he just went through history, and he talked about how he kept hoping and how hard it is to keep hoping, because you keep hoping that change will happen all your life, and then you see it doesn't really change. And so for me, I really wanted to stand and be present in his pain, be with him in his pain, while not letting go of my own consciousness, my own absolute commitment to the world as I wanted to show up. How do you do that? How do you stay present in somebody's pain and not discount it? At the same time, be fully present in your belief of a better world, and that world that's happening. How do you do that in that moment?
Thanks for that question, Shauna, and I can hear how challenging that has been for you, and your own emotion around it. And so, can I ask a question? Do you feel as though your own hope was shaken, or do you feel as though you weren't able to stand with him in his experience?
Yeah, I don't think my own hope was shaken, but the rawness of his pain, captured me. And there was a part of me that wanted to step out of his pain, leave his pain. But, he's my best friend.
Yeah, sure.
So I wanted to be in his pain and not deny his reality as he sees it, or deny why he mitigates his hope because he doesn't want to be disappointed anymore. And yet be able to articulate to him, what I am committed to manifest for all of us.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you were able to do that?
I don't know. I did not feel like I was doing as good a job as I wanted to.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, it's a great question, Shauna, and spiritual mind treatment and the work that we do spiritually, we do at the level of the absolute. And we do it when we're doing our spiritual work. When we're with another person who is in a lot of pain, part of our spiritual work is to just be a loving presence and to be compassionate with somebody else's pain. There's always the double-edged sword. To be in the pain with another person is not necessarily something that I would choose. I might be a container in which someone can experience their pain without making it bad or wrong, but I actually don't want to collude with a false reality. I don't want to collude with a false picture. And so that much pain comes out of the belief that things will never change. And yet, historically, if we look at, so to me, for me, how do I do that? I take a universal point of view. You cannot look in one lifetime. You cannot look in one election cycle. You cannot look in even one generation. The universe does not operate at that at that speed. The universe operates at the universal level. And granted, we are moving a lot faster than we were in the past. But we have to step back to the 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 foot level and see the thread of life as it continues to unfold, as it continues to move towards more life. And so this is the challenge, right? We can create so much pain within ourselves because we argue for our limitation. Well, look, that didn't happen. Well, look what happened there and how awful that was. Well, look, there it happened again. But I bet you that if you sat down in that same period of time, you could say, but look at that piece of progress that was made. Look at that change that happened. Look at where that went. Look at what moved forward, right? And so we ourselves are always reminded that we contribute to what's going on by what we pay attention to. And so, this is your best friend. It's entirely up to your relationship how willing someone is to allow you to move them. And so how long do we sit with someone in pain and then say, okay, and how do we move through this to another place? And that's a delicate question, Shauna, and only you know the answer to that. In how long one is going to sit with someone and then say, okay, and so do you want to make a change? Do you want to be part of the change? Do you want to see it differently? I'll never forget, this was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, there was this fabulous BBC, I think it was a BBC video that was put out. And there was a lot of conversation about, we're just not making it. It's just, things are worse, the blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And so they took a graph and they did a 250-year graph of the basic prosperity benchmarks of the world. People, having clean water, enough food, whatever they considered a living wage, more ability to self-govern, and I think the status of women, right? And they plotted a graph over a 250-year period of time of all the areas of the world and different countries and different blocks of countries. And in a 250-year period of time, every single, no one left out, every single one of these circles made movement upward and forward. Every single one of them. Granted, some made more, some made less, but every one of them made movement. There was nobody at the end of 250 years that was still back in the same corner at the same level that entire time. And in the course of all of that, there was the conversation, we have significantly less war on the planet than we had 250 years ago, significantly more, and I can't remember what all the right? And so it's so much of it is a question of, what do we focus on? What kinds of conversations are we having? Are we actually, this is why we teach in the science of mind, look for the good and praise it. And I know that when somebody's in a lot of pain, it can be very, very hard to look for the good. And yet this is why we need our friends. We need our friends not to jump in the hole with us. We need our friends to stand outside the hole and reach a hand in and say, but let me show you something else. Let me show you another way of looking at it. Let me show you the possibility. And again, Shauna, it's a great question. It's a delicate, we don't want to beat people up with a new vision. Why don't you get your shit together and just see it differently? We want to continually remind them, the more spiritually grounded somebody is, the more they are doing this work, the more effortless it is to give them a hand and pull them up. People who are very new to this work can really cling to, but look how awful it is. It's ain't it awful, ain't it awful, ain't it awful. That didn't work, well, that didn't work, well, that didn't work. And you know what? The more that we continue to say, well, that didn't work, it'll never change, what are we doing? We are promoting the very thing we don't want. So science of mind is not a psychological point of view, and it's not an emotional point of view. Science of mind is an absolute spiritual point of view. And so we have to find our human, compassionate way of being with people that really allows us to stay connected without allowing and promoting the very consciousness that we want to change. So another thing I would say, Shauna, in answer to your question, is that when I'm sitting with someone who's in that kind of pain, partly what I'm doing is creating a container, and I'm allowing them to be in that pain. And what I'm saying to myself is, this is not the spiritual truth. This is not what I believe is the truth. This is not, I don't have to say that out loud if they're not ready to hear it and can't hear it. But the last thing I want to do is jump in the hole with them, because I refuse to allow it. I will not promote it, and by God, I am about creating something new. And what I know is my deliberate, intentional, trained thinking is more powerful than all of that upset. Absolutely more powerful than all that upset, because I am deliberately using the law in my own consciousness to say, oh, that's not true. No, we've definitely made progress, and I can see it, and I'm holding my vision, and I don't have to say any of those things out loud, and I can hold that container without being in the pain with someone else, right? Because when I get in the pain with someone else, I am participating in allowing, and I'm participating in promoting. So this is called spiritual detachment. And it is a very challenging thing for those of us who are very heart-centered, very kinesthetic. If you are very in the Myers-Briggs, if you're in ENF, in HBDI or emergenetics, if you're very red, if you're very relationally oriented, this is spiritual detachment can be very challenging. And in our day and age, spiritual detachment feels cold. What you don't care? You don't care about my pain? What, you don't care? You're not very sympathetic. Well, you don't have very much empathy or compassion. None of which may be true. I can have a great deal of empathy for that tendency to look at all the ways it hasn't worked out yet, and all the fear about what that means for the future. I can have a great deal of empathy and compassion for that, and hold to my truth that principle is not bound by precedent. And so that universal viewpoint, that longer trajectory, will it happen in our lifetime? I don't know whether it will happen in our lifetime or not, but by God, it will happen because we are creating something new. And so that spiritual detachment allows me to create a container in which someone can have their experience, but not jump in the hole with them. And continue to see and declare spiritual truth, right, beyond race suggestion, right? Race suggestion says the past is a predictor of the future, but it's not. If that were true, women wouldn't have the vote. If that were true, the LGBT wouldn't be able to get married. If that were true, we wouldn't be seeing another massive shift in consciousness around race and hate-based violence in our country, if that were true. So we have tons of evidence that principle is not bound by precedent. And that's a part of the lifeline that we can give to our friends and invite them in to creating something new with us. Is it easy? No, it's not. And people's pain is not to be diminished or denied, but we don't have to jump in the hole with them, right? We have to stay committed to the vision of a world that works for everyone and lives that work. and trusting that this is the natural trajectory of the universal principles. Life for more life, love for more love, wholeness for more wholeness. That is actually the trajectory, and that we're going to stop getting in the way and start living in alignment with that spiritual truth. Thank you so much for your question, Shauna, and for the sharing, and Dennis, and for the comments, and just delighted to spend this time. These are real and important things that we have to grapple with. So I look forward to seeing you at the celebration to celebrate 4th of July, freedom and independence and interdependence, and we'll look forward to seeing you on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday of this week. Lots of new stuff coming up. Have a beautiful rest of the holiday weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.